Welcome to the newest episode of the Father, Son, and Holy Scriptures podcast, where we relate biblical teachings to our modern day lives.
I'm Dave. I'm Jake's father.
And I'm Jake. I'm Dave's son. And I've got my ESV Lutheran Study Bible here, so we are all set to go.
Awesome.
So last time we talked about Genesis, and if you guys know much about the Bible, you'd recognize that we didn't cover very much of Genesis. We only did maybe the first 3 chapters or so. And so we wanted to cover just a couple points real quick off the top. We are planning on skipping around the Bible quite a bit here in this series that we're going to be doing. It is a long book with lots of content in it.
Genesis is 50 chapters.
Genesis is 50 chapters, and like I said, we did 3. So yeah, we're gonna be skipping around the Bible quite a bit here. Our goal is to get through the major topics of the Bible, starting with Genesis and ending at the end there in Revelation. And so we are going to be skipping around to Exodus is going to be what we're going to be talking about here today. And again, we're not even going to cover the whole book of Exodus. We're just going to do a few chapters. We will be looping back around once we finish up this little series that we're doing to hit some of the bigger points that we did miss. I mean, in Genesis alone, there's things like Noah's Ark, the Tower of Babel, Jacob and Esau.
Right, these are big stories. We should definitely be talking about
points.
at some point.
So we'll definitely get back to looping around for
Joseph
those.
and his Technicolor Dreamcoat.
Yeah, there's a lot of missed stuff.
In fact, that's a play on Broadway. We should totally talk about that.
We should do the play instead of the Bible story.
We could do either. It's our podcast.
But this week, we are going to be talking about Moses and the story of Moses from Exodus and the story of the Exodus from Exodus.
Exodus and Exodus, yeah. So Exodus is a book in the Bible. It's the second book of the Bible, and it's also an incident. It's a thing that happened. The English word Exodus actually comes from a Latin word. Do you know what the Latin word is?
No.
Exodus. So yeah,
Okay.
The English word comes from a Latin word, Exodus. And that, in fact, that Latin word actually comes from a Greek word. It's got a Greek root to it.
Okay.
And the Greek word is Exodus. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so nothing really new there. But Exodus, the word itself, it actually means to exit or to depart. It actually is 2 words put together, way out and a road. So it's like the road out or the way out. That's really what Exodus means. And so really the Exodus that we're talking about, it is God bringing his people out of oppression. That's really the Exodus that we're talking about here today from the book of Exodus. And this Exodus happened somewhere between 1200 and 1400 BC. Now, when I think about this story, you mentioned Moses. Moses is a big character in the Exodus story, in the book of Exodus. And whenever I think of Moses, maybe this is for some of our older listeners, I think of the 1956 film with Charlton Heston in it called The 10 Commandments. That was the name of the movie. And Charlton Heston was this kind of white-haired character who played Moses. And I just remember this classic part of the movie where he's got his hands up and there's these waves and this ocean crashing in the background. Of course, back then, filmography and there wasn't a lot of CGI back then. And so they kind of overlaid Charlton Heston's face over the ocean waves crashing. And so whenever I think of Moses, whenever I think of the Red Sea or the Exodus, people leaving, I just think of Charlton Heston. So I don't know, whatever that means to people out there. Maybe some people can relate to that. Maybe other people are like, wow, this guy's old. That movie's almost 100 years old, frankly.
Yeah, but we're talking about the same, well, not Charlton Heston, the same guy, but we're talking about Moses, the same guy. We're going to be covering the earlier parts of his life here when we start talking about young Moses. And just a little bit of background, even before Moses was born, the situation he was born into, there was a man called Jacob. He's the chosen of God. He's the founder of Israel.
Jacob's name was changed to Israel.
Yep. Yeah. He came to Egypt with 70 people. That is the Israelites at the time, was this group of 70 people who came into Egypt. And about 5 generations later is when Moses is born. In that amount of time, the population of the Israelites spiked so much that the Pharaoh in Egypt began growing afraid of the Israelites to the point where he had enslaved them. They were forced into labor for the Egyptians. And then he'd also implemented a new law where the newborn male children of the Israelites were being murdered when they were born. And so this is the situation that Moses is born into in Egypt. And there's an interesting verse in here in Exodus 2, verse 2. when Moses is born that I thought was neat when I was reading through this. I just wanted to bring this up real quick. The verse is, "The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months." Which in and of itself is not a super neat verse.
Well, she was trying to hide her baby, right, from Pharaoh.
She was trying to hide her baby from Pharaoh, yeah. The neat thing that I found in there as I was reading my Bible here, the word that they use there for fine, the Hebrew word that's used originally is actually the same Hebrew word that's used to describe all of God's creations back in Genesis that we were talking about in our last episode. It's the same word fine is used for God's good creations. I just thought that was fantastic, just the connection between the 2 episodes, between everything that's going on in the Bible here. I thought that was super cool.
Right. Yeah, Genesis chapter 2, God is creating everything, and he sees that it is good. That Hebrew word is tob. And here, when Moses' mother gives birth to him, she sees that he is tob. He is good.
He's good.
Right? He's fair, or a fine child. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was super cool. But yeah, so Moses is born, and then when he is born, his mother places him in a basket and puts him in the Nile River in an attempt to save Moses' life. He's got better odds floating down a river in a basket than he does with Pharaoh's soldiers.
Right.
So Moses' mother puts him in a basket and sets him down in the Nile River. Later that day, Pharaoh's daughter, the man who had ordered Moses to be killed, his daughter is bathing in the Nile River and finds the basket with Moses floating in it. And the really, really cool thing about this whole story is it actually kicks off here with Pharaoh's daughter finding Moses in that basket, and she shows pity on this child. The verse here says, "She took pity on him and said, 'This is one of the Hebrews' children.' She realized this is one of the children that her father had demanded be killed, and she had pity on this baby."
Had compassion, huh?
Yeah, compassion, pity on this baby. And so she takes the child from the basket in the river, and Moses' sister, his older sister, is actually hiding nearby. And when she sees Pharaoh's daughter pull up the baby from the basket, she runs up and offers to find a nurse for the baby for Pharaoh's daughter, which was a pretty common practice. So you have a wet nurse who would take care of the child until they're of age. And so Pharaoh's daughter has the little girl, Moses' sister, go find a wet nurse for Moses.
Really?
And who of all people could this little girl go find but Moses' mother? The perfect candidate to take care of this baby. And she brings Moses' mother back to the Pharaoh's daughter, and Pharaoh actually ends up paying Moses' mother to take care of Moses as a baby.
That's awesome.
I just love the irony in this situation of God taking care of Moses and his mother through this crazy situation where the man who's trying to have Moses killed is the one who ends up paying for his care as a child.
That is incredible. Yeah, that's amazing, dude. And I mean, imagine if you're Moses' mother, right? You're trying to hide the baby and you realize, I can't really hide him anymore. Like, what am I going to do? And she gets to the point where she puts her baby in a basket and kind of pushes him out into the river. Like, man, she had to be going crazy inside, so distraught. And then God ends up providing, right? Which is amazing. God uses one person's compassion, Pharaoh's daughter, not only to save Moses, but to provide for Moses' mother so she can be with her son, right? Moses' sister Miriam gets to grow up with Moses. And in fact, God uses Pharaoh's daughter's compassion to save an entire nation, because we learn that Moses is the one who ends up leading the people of Israel out of Egypt. He's at least the one in the front of the line. So I think it's important for us to never really underestimate how much God can do by you and me, people listening, by just taking a moment, taking a simple act of compassion on another person. I think it's important for us to realize God can do an amazing thing if you and I would just take a second, show compassion to other people. We don't ever really know exactly how far that's going to go, right? Or how deeply somebody could be moved by just a kind act that you and I show, you know? I was actually at the barber the other day, not too long ago, and I was sitting there and I was on my phone, and of course, wherever my phone goes, my work goes, and so I'm always kind of on my phone. The girl that cuts my hair, she was laughing because she had somebody else in the chair, and she's like, you in a hurry? And she's like, I see you got your phone, so you're probably doing work. I said, yeah, I'm on my phone. And so I didn't really realize so much, but the lady had come up next to me, and she was trying to get her coat off a hook that was kind of right behind me there. And it didn't take me too long, 'cause she was kind of standing right next to me, and I realized she couldn't really raise her arms, so she couldn't get her coat up off this hook. I said, oh, hold on just 1 second. Let me help you. And so I just stood up, and I got her coat off the hook, and she put her hands out, and she was like, thank you so much. Like, that was so kind. And so rather than give her the coat, I actually opened it up, and I kind of encouraged her, here, let me help you put it on. And it was just kind of a simple thing that I did. And she literally said, how much better this world would be if people would just take a second to notice other people, right?
Yeah.
And I thought that was really important. Again, it wasn't a big thing. It didn't take me a lot of time. It didn't cost me any money. It didn't put me out, really. I just saw another person who was kind of in need. I had some compassion, right? Did a simple thing like help her with her coat on, and man, she was floored by that. She just thought it was such an amazing thing. And I guess that just speaks to the fact that we don't see that kind of thing happen as much as we probably ought to, you know? But we see it in this story, don't we?
Definitely.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's fast forward a little bit here. That's Moses as a baby. But after many, many years, there's a new Pharaoh now, still a pretty evil dude. Moses is a young man, and he finds himself through a series of events out in the desert. He's tending sheep, and he's actually married now. He's tending sheep for his father-in-law, a guy named Jethro. And there's this great story in Exodus chapter 3 where God meets Moses in a burning bush. And actually, towards the end of this section, I think my opinion is this is one of the most pivotal parts of the Bible, the end of this section here in Exodus chapter 3. And more than that, even, just not one of the most pivotal parts of the Bible, but one of the most pivotal parts of our Christian faith as Jesus followers. We're going to see some really, really powerful stuff here at the end of this story. But let's go ahead and just read some of Exodus chapter 3 for us here for a second. It opens up and it says this: Now Moses was tending the flock of sheep that belonged to Jethro, his father-in-law. God appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. So Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought to himself, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush is burning, but it doesn't burn up. And God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. So, kind of get this picture. Moses is wandering in the desert, right? And what does he see?
A bush on fire. Not a weird sight. I mean, it's the desert. Things catch on fire in the desert sometimes, I'm sure.
Right?
Yeah. Burning bush. Just on fire there. Man walks up to this bush just to see what's going on. I mean, it's a little bit weird that it hasn't gone anywhere, right? Things should burn away eventually. But yeah, walks up to this burning bush, and all of a sudden a voice is coming out of the bush talking to him.
Right?
Right? Like Moses is going crazy in the desert, hearing voices calling out to him. And then he hears that the bush goes on to say, take off your shoes.
Right.
Right? And then after this, finally, Moses realizes, or the bush says to Moses, I am God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And then Moses hides his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Yeah,
it says, do not come any closer in verse 5. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. So he's not afraid when the bush is on fire. He's not afraid when it's not consumed. He's not even afraid when the bush literally calls out to him. In fact, he answers, hey, bush, here I am, right? But it isn't until God reveals himself as the father of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that he hides his feet, or hides his face. Yeah. Interesting thing there about God saying to him, take off your sandals, for this place where you are standing is holy ground, right? Oftentimes I think we consider feet as, dirty, unclean, right? I mean, they wore shoes for a reason, right?
Yeah.
He was wandering in the desert. There's scorpions. And God says, no, take off your sandals. And I thought that's always kind of interesting because, even though Moses' feet were probably dirty, they probably stinky, all kinds of things, God doesn't say to Moses, keep your stinky feet away from my clean area. He really is inviting Moses to take off his shoes, and allow his feet to sort of enter into contact with God's holy area, right? Sort of to me saying, don't worry, Moses, your stinky feet won't like infect my holy ground. Rather, the opposite is true. My holiness is actually going to change your filthiness, right? Kind of a cool section there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then God goes on to say, Moses, I've seen the misery of my people in Egypt because they become enslaved, they become oppressed. He says, I have seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I know, or I am intimately aware of their sufferings. So I have come down to rescue them. And I think that's a really cool piece there as well, right? We see in this section, God says, look, I see my people. I've heard their cries. I intimately know about their suffering. In fact, I have come down to actually do something about it. You know, one of the cool things I think about this section is it's showing us a part of God's character. Oftentimes, I know tons and tons of people are like, they say stuff like, well, where was God, you know, when all this was happening? Or, you know, how did this happen and this caught God by surprise? Or, you know, all these things that we might think about God. And yet here in the Word of God, in the Bible, Exodus is teaching us, God sees us. He hears us. He knows intimately the suffering that we're dealing with, right? It's not only he sees from afar, maybe he hears from afar, but he knows he's kind of experiencing that with us. And he comes down to actually do something about it, right? And so I just think it's an amazing piece of the puzzle where it's important for us to know that God is actively engaged in our day-to-day lives, you know? So that's a cool section right there. He sees, he hears, he cares, and he takes action. And then it goes on to say this, but Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you, and this will be the sign for you that it is I who have sent you. When you've brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this very mountain that I'm talking to you on right now, right? Which is amazing. And this right here, this next section, this is actually that really pivotal piece I referenced a minute ago. This is really the piece that I think is one of the most foundational pieces of our Christian faith. God says, or Moses says to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your father has sent me to you. And they ask, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? Now listen to this. God says to Moses, I am who I am. So when Moses asks, what is your name? People ask me, who is this God that has sent me? What is his name? And God answers, this is my name. I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent you to me. And the reason I say that this is so pivotal is because that idea of I am in the Hebrew, it's sort of this idea of a certainty. There's no uncertainty whatsoever. It's only certainty of eternity, of always being there no matter what. In fact, we learn in the book of Hebrews that God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, right? That's his whole idea of I am. There was no beginning of God, and there is no ending of God. And the most incredible piece about this, that name, the I am, he goes on to refer to himself as the Lord Yahweh. Yahweh is a holy name of God in Hebrew. In fact, so holy that when the scribes were writing these very sections of Scripture, they would be writing with a quill, an ink and a quill, and they would be writing this story. But when they would come to this word, this I am or Yahweh, they would stop, put that quill down, get a brand new quill, write the word Yahweh, and then take that quill and break it and throw it away. Like no other word should even be written with the same pen that we write God's name, Yahweh. It is so holy. And ancient Hebrews wouldn't even say Yahweh because they recognize his name as being holy above all other things, so holy that not even the human lips should be allowed to speak God's name, Yahweh. And that's what he is saying about himself. That's who God is saying, I am holy above holies, Alpha, Omega. He goes on to refer himself to so many other things. But here he's really pointing out his holiness, his deity, never beginning, always being there, never ending. That is the God that we're talking about. Not created, but always there. The cool thing is, in John chapter 8, Jesus actually refers to himself in this exact same way. Jesus is, the Pharisees are trying to have a debate with Jesus, and cool thing, Jesus never kind of gets into debates with these guys. He just does what he does. But Jesus says this, he says, your father Abraham, and he's talking to the Jewish people in the New Testament now. This is 1,400, 1,500 years after the story of Exodus. But Jesus is saying to the Jewish people, your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. Jesus is talking about himself. Abraham saw it and was glad. And they said, you're not yet 50 years old. They shouted at Jesus, but you've seen Abraham? How is that possible? And Jesus says this really interesting thing in John chapter 8, verse 58. He says, very truly, I tell you, meaning like certainly, without a doubt, I am telling you right now, Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am. And he uses that same phrase that we see in Exodus to talk about himself. Right? He's saying, I am the holy of all holies. I am the same yesterday, today, and forever. I am Yahweh. He's calling himself deity. He is saying about himself God. And that's why I say this section here in Exodus chapter 3, it is, I believe, so pivotal to the Christian faith. If folks are saying to themselves, yes, I'm a Christian, if they are saying to themselves, yes, I follow Jesus, I think this is one of those pieces that we should really understand and go back and read. And in fact, we aren't able to cover, like you said a minute ago, Jake, all of the story of Exodus, all of Genesis, all of the Bible in our podcasts. And so I really encourage people to go back and read these stories on their own, right? Go back and read the book of Exodus. You're going to find a lot of really cool things in there. And you can kind of look this stuff up for yourself. Don't believe us, right? Don't believe what I'm telling you necessarily. Go back and see it, for yourself. So this is where God calls Moses to go out and lead the people of Israel out of Egypt. And he reveals to Moses, reveals to the Israelite people, reveals to us who he really is. So Moses goes off to talk to Pharaoh about freeing the Israelites, and Pharaoh refuses basically to let them go. This is his workforce. Even though he was afraid of them, these were the people that helped him build all of his cities, all of his great towers, all of the pyramids and things like that. And Pharaoh decided, no, I'm not going to let these people go. I'd rather have them enslaved and oppressed, right? But God intervenes, and he brought plague after plague after plague upon the Egyptians until Pharaoh finally agreed to let the Israelites leave. And it took 12 plagues for Pharaoh to finally admit to let the people go.
Yeah. And you know what, even as we've been looking into these plagues here for this episode today, we've decided that there's definitely so much content going on here in this story of Exodus, even specifically with the plagues. We are not going to cover the plagues here in this episode, as much as I'm sure you want to.
I do.
Yeah. We're going to have to do another episode on the plagues. So that one will be coming up sometime in the future.
There's a lot there in the plagues, actually.
There's a lot.
There is a whole podcast episode all by itself.
At least one. So there will be another episode coming on plagues. We'll do that in the future. But for this story of Exodus, we're going to wrap this up at the Red Sea. Okay. And the story of the Red Sea. And so, like you said, there were the 12 plagues where Pharaoh is finally convinced that he needs to let the Israelites go from Egypt. And so the Israelites flee from the city of Ramesses. The Bible says there were about 600,000 men, not including women and children.
How many?
600,000 men.
How many people came into Egypt to begin with?
70.
No wonder Pharaoh was all uptight.
Yeah, so we can understand why he was having some problems. But yeah, so 600,000 men, plus women and children, flee from Ramesses. They take a roughly 30-day journey through the desert in Egypt to the Red Sea, and they find themselves in kind of a tough spot. The Red Sea on the side they were on is U-shaped almost. It's like this big cup, and they had been trapped in up against all sides of the Red Sea, and Pharaoh at this point had decided that it was a terrible idea to let the Israelites go, and he had to chase them down. In fact, the Bible says the Lord hardened his heart, and Pharaoh came with an army and chariots to chase down the Israelites to the Red Sea.
So this is where Charleston Heston comes in? Charlton Heston.
No, I think that was the Ten Commandments, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's
well,
later.
yeah.
That's still later. But yeah, so the Lord has Moses reach his hand out over the Red Sea, and the Lord parts the Red Sea for the Israelites to be able to walk across. And I think it's really neat in here. The Israelites get to walk across the Red Sea. It says on dry ground. And then the Egyptians chase the Israelites into the Red Sea. And as the Israelites cross the Red Sea, it says here that the Lord looked down in a pillar of cloud and fire and looked down on the Egyptian forces and threw the Egyptian forces into a panic, clogging their chariot wheels so they drove heavily. And the Egyptians said, "Let us flee before Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians."
Wow.
Yeah. And so the Israelites got to walk across an ocean on dry ground.
Right.
And then when the Egyptians followed them in to capture them again, the Lord bogs down their chariots, stops them from catching up to the Israelites, and then has Moses reach his hand back out over the Red Sea, and the water crushes back in, and the Egyptians are drowned. And that is kind of where the story of Exodus, well, not ends, but that's where we're going to end the story of Exodus.
Right. Yeah.
But there's some really neat stuff in here. The Lord just taking care of the Israelites the entire time is so cool. At one point in time, the Israelites are complaining, and I love the Israelites because I think the Israelites are a lot like me.
Okay.
The Israelites are really good at complaining to whoever's in charge, and really just not getting it. At one point in time, they turn to Moses and they say, "Is it because there are no graves left in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness?" The Israelites don't even see the obvious miracles happening in front of them. They're so blind by the things going on around them they're hard. Like, we've been walking through the desert for a month now. This is so hard. We had it good in Egypt where we were slaves, right? This is what they're begging to go back to, is to go back to slavery in Egypt. But the Lord is leading them with pillars of cloud and pillars of fire, splitting an ocean in front of them so they can walk on dry ground.
And yet they complain.
Right.
Right.
How like the Israelites can I be?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. There's a cool thing here in Exodus chapter 14, verse 4, where God is speaking, and he says, "I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue the people, but I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord." Again, there's that word Yahweh. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So the Israelites went ahead and did what God told them to do. And I think it's cool because I think oftentimes, we think about God wanting the people that he's interacting with to trust him more, right? He wanted the Israelites to trust him, so he did a lot of things. He fed them manna in the desert. He gave them water out of a rock, right? He made it so their sandals never wore out as they were wandering through the desert. But in this particular case, he says, yeah, I'm going to do this to save my people Israel. But he goes on to say, I'm going to actually do this to gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and his army, so that the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. I think that this speaks to the fact that the Bible teaches us that God doesn't want anybody to go without knowing who he is. Typically, everything he's doing is so that people will see him, acknowledge him, recognize him, and ultimately put their trust in him, right? I mean, that's why he says he does this. It reminds me of a verse out of 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12, where Peter is writing to Christians or believers, and he says, live such good lives among the people outside the church, that though they try to accuse you of doing wrong, they will see your good deeds and glorify God in heaven, right? Peter's saying, do these things, live good lives, obey God, trust in God, allow God to work in your life, so that the people outside the church will glorify God, right? We'll praise God. And we see that same kind of thing playing out here, that God is bringing glory to himself, not only for the Israelites, but he wants the Egyptians to see who he is too, right? Ultimately, God desires that nobody should perish, but everybody should come to saving faith in him, you know?
Yeah, one cool thing that I thought that was in here, it's actually Moses' response to the Israelites' complaint that I read out earlier. I think it's one of the most peace-bringing or calming parts of this whole story of Exodus is Moses' response to the people of Israel when they're complaining about the issues going on. He says, "Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent." It's so cool that
Can you read that again? Where's that from?
Yeah. This is Exodus 14, chapters 13 and 14.
Verses 13, 14, got it.
So Moses says to the people, "Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent." The Lord is making this promise to us through Moses that he's the one who saves us, right?
Right.
Moses doesn't part the Red Sea, right?
Good
Moses
point.
puts his hand out over the waters. God parts the Red Sea.
Right on.
All we have to do, the Lord says, all we have to do is be silent. I love that.
Yeah,
It's not by us, our power. We're not the ones who have to solve the problem. The Lord is going to solve the problem for us. All we have to do is trust in him.
Yeah. Yeah, and it says there, the Egyptians that you see today, you'll never see again, right? Like in a sense, the problem that you're struggling with right now, I'm going to remove it. It's going to be gone, right? You won't have to deal with it ever again. If you, right, be silent, be still, be at ease, hold your peace, allow me to take care, of the problem. And I think that's really a great way to kind of summarize the book of Exodus. On the surface, Exodus is a story about, Moses leading the people out of slavery, right? Or Moses parting the Red Sea, or Charlton Heston, up there, right? In that movie, The Ten Commandments, Charlton Heston was the star, like he was at the center. And yet really what we see in the book of Exodus is God is the star. God is at the center. It's basically a story that records God saving his people and revealing himself to even, the Egyptians. That's the reality of this story. Talks a lot about God's character. He's a God who goes to great lengths, even miraculous lengths, to save his people out of oppression, out of hardship, out of slavery. He sees, he hears, he knows what we're going through, and he comes down to help in our day-to-day lives, right? And I think this really connects with us today, where we are this very minute. There are a lot of people that that I talk to personally on a day-to-day basis, our church deals with on a day-to-day basis, that are struggling with oppression, struggling with, slavery, maybe to addiction. When we use the term addiction, I think we oftentimes think of like drug addiction and like hardcore things, but there's a lot of things that people are addicted to, right? Shopping, television. I wonder if there's anybody out there today who's kind of feeling like they're struggling with some addiction, right? They're feeling like they're trying to fill this hole with something and they can't ever find it, right? The book of Exodus reminds us again, God sees, God hears, God knows, and he wants to come down and he wants to help us. In fact, Jesus' ministry really is got an exclamation point at the end of it. He describes his ministry as coming to proclaim liberty to the captives, right? That's what Christ did. He came down to provide freedom from those who are oppressed. He says in Matthew chapter 11, "Come to me, all who are weary, who are heavy laden or heavy burden," like a beast of burden that has all this weight on their shoulders. He says, "Come to me, all of you folks, and I will give you rest." One of the things that I think is maybe such a discouragement as we work with folks that are struggling in addiction and having trouble beating that is that they feel like they're all alone. They feel like they have to beat it on their own. They feel like nobody could possibly understand what it is they're dealing with, and they feel like there's no hope. in this story of Exodus, God says, no, I see you. Like, I hear you. I intimately know the suffering that you're dealing with. And I have come down to help you, to free you. And in Jesus Christ, we can find that salvation. In Luke chapter 4, Jesus says, the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom to the prisoners and recovery of sight to the blind, and to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. That's who Christ is. So yeah, we look at Exodus, maybe we think Moses, but what we ought to be seeing is God, and God here interacting and pointing us to Jesus Christ, who is the manifestation of God, on earth. And that's the beauty, I think, of this whole story in Exodus.
Yeah, so I think that's all we got time here for today. Thank you guys so much for joining us again here for the Father, Son, Holy Scriptures podcast. Again, if you guys have any questions or comments or anything about what we talked about here today, or if you guys want us to make sure we cover something that we did skip, like we've been talking about, we are skipping around the Bible here a little bit.
Like the plagues?
The plagues, yep. We'll be getting back to the plagues. If there's something from Genesis, that we skipped, shoot us a message. We'd love to hear from you guys.
Noah's Ark.
We'll make sure we get back to anything that we hear messages about we've been skipping around on. New episodes will be coming up again the first of the month for you guys. This one's here for March. And then the next one will be coming out April 1st for you. So keep a lookout for that. We are available on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, all those places you can find your podcasts. If you got any other questions about what we got going on, you can shoot us an email at info@crossroadscle.com. Please, we would appreciate it too if you guys got friends who you think might be interested in the podcast. We'd love to get them involved, give them a share, like the podcast.
I had a guy actually tell me after the first podcast that he shared it with a couple of friends of his, and they actually took it and shared it with other people. So it's,
heck yeah,
spreading around.
We love it. That's awesome. So yeah, if you guys want anything else, there's always the website you can reach out to us, crossroadscle.com. And with that, we're praying that you guys would fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he works for you today. For the troubles you see today, you shall never see again, and the Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent.
Amen.